Welcome back to The Heat. We're discussing the increase of militant attacks worldwide and how governments are responding. Let's get back to the panel. Imtiaz, when we look at how governments are responding, just a few weeks ago we saw a horrific attack in Pakistan when a suicide bomber killed dozens of people in a park. Now, one theory was that attack was carried out in retaliation for a military crackdown on radical groups in Pakistan. That puts Pakistani authorities in a very difficult place, doesn't it? Because how does it combat these groups if they are threatened or literally blackmailed in this way by groups that are saying, if you attack us, we will attack soft targets, we will attack civilians?
Well, I think Pakistan is pitched against an enemy that is being used by multiple actors. I think it's also part of the proxy war that that Pakistan is involved in. It's, this India-Pakistan-Afghanistan relationship has been checkered, and regardless which, I would say this is a pattern, part of the chain of events, terrorist attacks that Pakistan has seen in the last 15 years. They are picking up their targets as they will. At times they are picking up Christians, sometimes other non-Muslim groups, but mostly this is Muslims, Shia Muslims, Sunni Muslims, and this is, I think, a continuous challenge for the government, for the military, regardless whether these groups are hitting back or not. We have to understand that the past about 2 years, there has been a massive crackdown. It has helped in the improvement of the situation. The army has led this from the front. The incidence of violence has come down by more than 50%. However, these terrorist groups, which are either associated with Al-Qaeda, with IS, or Pakistani militant groups who are like proxies for external forces, they've been still operating because you can't eliminate them altogether.
And David, if we look at the response in Europe, particularly in the aftermath of the Paris and Brussels attacks, as our reporter told us at the beginning of the show, European countries have taken some steps. France has instituted a state of emergency. There's been a tightening of border controls, and there's that anti-radicalization program, which is being conducted actually in prisons in European countries because they believe that's where a lot of the radicalization takes place. I mean, is that going to be enough?
No, that's not going to be enough. I mean, Europe faces this perfect storm. You have three things that converged, one of which is this massive explosion in foreign fighters going to Iraq and Syria. You have somewhere between 4,000 and 5,000 Western Europeans who've gone over, which means that the domestic threat level massively increased as returnees came back. Second, you have this massive influx of migrants into Europe, which stretches intelligence resources as they're trying to determine who's coming in. Jihadist groups, especially ISIS, have used migrant flows to plant operatives in. So that further stretches resources. And then the third thing is with the revelations that Edward Snowden put out about Western surveillance, suddenly jihadist groups understand surveillance techniques that are utilized. And there's been an explosion in encryption as a result by people who are very concerned about the effect of government surveillance on individual privacy. There's been much more in the way of apps and other things that allow for end-to-end encryption, where even the company isn't able to de-encrypt the messages that are sent using these applications. And so in the past, European law enforcement and intelligence resources were overstretched. So what they couldn't do with human surveillance, given that it takes about 20 officers to do round-the-clock surveillance, they did with electronic surveillance. Now a lot of that electronics has gone dark. The other problems you have in Europe are, number one, there are very short jail sentences. In France, for example, the average jail sentence for a terrorism offense is somewhere between 5 and 7 years, which means that when you arrest somebody, it'll have an effect of neutralizing them, but only for a limited time, as opposed to the United States or Middle Eastern states where the sentences are much longer. And then the final thing is that the depth and the thickness of these networks is rather astounding. one of the things I've advocated is they should go after jihadist networks, not just for terrorism offenses, but for the financial crimes they engage in, the full range of offenses, kind of like the United States did against the mob, in order to try to neutralize and thin down those networks.
But isn't that what the United States has been doing? Because the United States always says you've got to follow the money.
Right, absolutely. In this context, the U.S. has implemented a very similar approach. Now, not identical. What I'm talking about is not just following the money, but in anti-mob activity under Robert Kennedy's Justice Department, they would arrest mobsters for violating the Migratory Bird Act, for killing too many game birds, for lying on federal home applications, which isn't or federal home loan applications, which isn't following the money so much as just finding some crime that someone who's affiliated with the mob has committed and taking him out of the picture and thus thinning down the network. So I think that they have to follow the money, but also they need to thin down these networks. They're large enough that right now European states just can't manage, and intelligence agencies have been all but waving their arms, saying that they can't prevent the next attack.
Abdel, listening to David there talk about what efforts should be made by governments to combat rising radicalism, to combat these terrorist attacks. What about actually looking beyond that, looking at where these problems start, in the ghettos and the slums around Paris, around other cities, which are breeding grounds for radical groups, looking at that and addressing those social problems?
Yes, being in Europe, living in Europe for the last 40 years, I can really saying that the European government failed to integrate, at least 10 million Muslims in Europe. They were actually marginalized in most of European countries, and they never felt actually they are a full citizen. It is not like United States. Once you are in the States, once you got the passport, once you got the green card, you feel you are American, because if there is no any kind of racism, strong racism against that. The other thing is unemployment. Definitely there is some sort of discrimination when it comes to unemployment. The third important thing is, the underestimation. The problem is, the European government joined United States in intervening in the Middle East and, invading countries, changing regimes, and they expect the Arab population, the Muslim population in Europe to be completely detached from actually what is happening in the Middle East. This is extremely wrong. I believe it is a combination of many elements here. If we want to fight terrorism, if we want actually to beat terrorism, first we have to understand, and we should not underestimate the feeling of the people, whether in the Middle East or in Europe. For example, President Obama said that the biggest regret of his actually presidency is the invasion of Libya. Okay, but why you invaded Libya? Where is the plan B for Libya, for example? Now we have to invade Libya again, and we have maybe to change regimes. We have to fight Al-Qaeda, to fight Islamic State. The same thing in Syria, when the underestimation was very clear, when actually the West, Europe, United States, and Arab government started to intervene in Syria, actually they underestimated the nucleus of Al-Qaeda, the nucleus of Islamic State, which was building there. Islamic State used to sell equal of 3 million barrels of oil, which financed it actually and make it immune from any shortage of money. So this is the problem. Underestimation is the name of the game. What I believe, the European Union, okay, now they are using very effective methods of surveillances, of maybe cracking down on these kind of groups. But the problem is, you have to have a long-term strategy. Those experts should get together saying, how can we tackle this? How can we make Muslim communities in Europe immune from penetration from the ideology of radical organizations like Al-Qaeda, like the Islamic State, like Al-Nusra, whoever. This is what we should look at. Security solution is good, but it is not enough.
Imtiaz, this is often referred to as an unconventional war, and we hear another term that's been used to describe these conflicts. They're called asymmetric wars. States, as we know, have traditionally prepared themselves for conventional wars. Are countries around the world going to be prepared to take on radicals, to take on this war right now?
Well, I think the preparedness is increasing, but so is the danger. that is rooted in geopolitics. I mean, what we see in Iraq, in Syria, and Libya today, in Afghanistan, is all consequences of geopolitics. And as long as international politics is driven and determined by geopolitical considerations, it will serve as the oxygen to groups who would like to thrive on this anti-Western ideologies. So this basically multiplies the threat that the kind of threat that we now see facing a number of European countries, the threat that Pakistan has been fighting, because this ideology is germinating. So regardless whether you are getting 100 new recruits or 1,000 or 500, they are still lethal. They are living bombs. And this is a threat, a continuous threat, that most of the states now shall have to live with, and they shall have to face this asymmetrical threat with out-of-box, with non-intrusive methods, basically getting to the core of the masterminds. Without that, it will be very difficult. You can raise walls, you can create more barriers, but you shall have to attack the ideological foundations of all these recruitment centers who are preying on young people, a lot of them frustrated, faced with identity crisis. So I think this is a new kind of threat that all states shall have to find ways to deal with.
Okay, and that's where we have to leave it. That's Imtiaz Gul in Pakistan, Abdel Bari Atwan joining us from London, and David Gartenstein-Ross with me here in the studio. Thanks to all of you for joining us.